So, what's so wrong about having sex before or outside of marriage? Well, there are a plethora of reasons, but I'll just give you 2 reasons. So, first, sex outside of marriage deviates from the original design of sex. Sex was designed by God, He made sex, right? The designer knows the design best. So, we have to know what God's intent or design was in order to fully enjoy the gift that He's given us. In his book Mere Christianity, C.S. Lewis likens casual sex, referring to sex outside of marriage between a husband and a wife, to tasting food without the intent to swallow and digest it. I'll say that one more time. Having casual sex is like tasting food without the intent to swallow and digest it. He goes on to say, the Christian attitude does not mean that there is anything wrong about sexual pleasure. It means that you must not isolate that pleasure and try to get it by itself any more than you ought to try to get the pleasure of tasting without swallowing and digesting, by chewing things and spitting them out again. So this might be a little bit difficult to understand. So in plain English, this means that having sex with someone you aren't married to is an isolated act that deviates from the original design of sex and is therefore unsatisfying and incomplete. So obviously, another baseline assumption here is that God created sex to be enjoyed between a husband and a wife. Now, sex is a sacred gift that seals the marital covenant. Covenant simply means a promise that cannot be broken. Sex is a sacred gift that seals the marital covenant, tying the married man and woman physically, emotionally, and spiritually. Now, there's a famous verse in the Bible that says, "Therefore a man shall leave his father and his mother and hold fast to his wife, and they shall become one flesh." And in Ephesians chapter 5, it takes a step further. It says, "A man leaves his father and mother and is joined to his wife, and the two are united into one." This is a great mystery, but it is an illustration of the way Christ and the church are one. Sex is an illustration of the intimacy between God and His children, and it is also a foretaste of heaven, our impending union with God. Now, the second reason we should not engage in sexual activity before or outside of marriage is that sex creates soul ties. Now, the first time I've ever heard a sermon about sex was back when I was in college. The sermon was titled Sex, Soul Ties, and Pornography. And in that sermon, the pastor described a soul tie like this. A soul tie is simply a tie that is formed between two people's souls or their mind, will, and emotions. Soul ties are critical for human development. When a baby is conceived, it immediately grows a soul tie with the mother. The baby keeps this soul tie through its younger years. But what happens around 12 to 14 years old? The child starts to develop into adulthood and starts to become more distant and even rebellious towards its parents. What is happening is that the child is gradually cutting the strong soul tie and becoming their own person. The child is developing into an adult with his own dreams, inhibitions, and desires. The stage of cutting the soul tie is messy, but it is very healthy. And likewise, soul ties can be formed through sex. When I place a Scotch tape on a surface, it will stick strongly to it. But when I remove it from the surface, it will lose some of its strength and also take some of the original surface with it. Now, when I place it on another surface, it won't be as strong, but it will still stick. When I remove it again, it will again lose some of its strength and will also take some of the second surface with it. The tape is no longer pure, no longer as strong, and is carrying everything from the past on it. Now, the same happens for people who have multiple partners in sex. They carry a part of their previous partners with them, and the bond from sex grows weaker and weaker with each partner. Now, this is vividly seen through STDs, but it can also be seen from the emotions and mix of memories brought from each past partner. So if you engage in sexual activities before marriage, you are taking a part of the previous partner with you into marriage if one day you do get married, Physically, emotionally, spiritually, you are tied to them. So then why did God implant in us a sexual desire if He doesn't want us to exercise it in our single years? Well, to be clear, sexual desire is not evil. Okay? It is natural and it is normal. We were made for intimacy and community. Our God is communal by nature, the Father, Son, and the Spirit, and so we, made in His image, crave intimacy and connection. That is one of the most fundamental human needs, to be connected and to be intimate, right? But the problem is that we look to all the wrong places to give us that fulfillment and connection that we so desire. We have equated intimacy with sex, while the gospel of Jesus Christ teaches us to give, serve, and love. We've adopted the gospel of the world that tells us to take, use, and enjoy for our personal gratification. And as stated before, our desire for intimacy and connection can only be satisfied in our relationship and oneness with God Himself. No human being can meet that deep void in our hearts. And rest assured, sexual desire can be managed in our single years before they are expressed in the marriage bed. So then what do we do when sexual desire consumes us? Martin Luther had once said, "You cannot keep birds from flying over your head, but you can keep them from building a nest in your hair." Let me repeat that one more time. You cannot keep birds from flying over your head, but you can keep them from building a nest in your hair. So in plain English, this means that while you cannot control the thoughts from flying over your head and do believe that temptations will come, you can decide to dismiss those thoughts and not act upon those desires, thereby preventing sins from birthing. We demolish arguments and every pretension that sets itself up against the knowledge of God, and we take captive every thought to make it obedient to Christ. And to be blunt, if you're not filled with God's Spirit, that is the Holy Spirit, you will be filled with other spirits, which is essentially demons. You will be entertaining demons if you don't fill yourself up with the things of the Spirit. And so in the next video, I'm going to talk about some practical applications and what you can do to avoid falling into the path and the pattern and the cycle that you've been trying to break off from.